Ambassador Skand Ranjan Tayal, we have been talking and discussing about ASEAN-India relations, the 19th ASEAN-India Summit and the 17th East Asia Summit held in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. As we talk about these summits and issues, this particular year, 2022, is commemorated as the Friendship Year, commemorating 30 years of relationship with ASEAN. In the last 3 decades, Ambassador Tayal, what would you say, how far has we come as far as cooperation between India and ASEAN is concerned?
In 1992, 30 years back, the first contact between India and ASEAN started rather tentatively, and India was only a sectoral dialogue partner. But from 2003 onwards, the relationship grew very rapidly, and since 2005, India started having annual summits with ASEAN, and now we have the 19th ASEAN-India Summit. And from dialogue partnership to strategic partnership, and now the relationship was raised to comprehensive strategic partnership, which shows how seriously the two sides take this relationship, that it is in the importance of both India and the 10 members of ASEAN. And in growth trade, which was hardly about maybe less than 10 billion, has now reached $100 billion. There is investment of India in ASEAN as well as ASEAN countries in India, which is $40 billion from India, and from ASEAN to India, $70 billion. And the scale of relationship is very vast, very comprehensive. And in June, we had a special ASEAN-India Foreign Ministers meeting, which was chaired by our External Affairs Minister, Shri S. Jaishankar, on 16 June 2022, on the topic building bridges in the Indo-Pacific to strengthen and deepen strategic partnership. So while there has always been strong economic component in India-ASEAN relations, the effort now is to enhance the strategic component of the relationship. And one aspect that later this month there will be meeting of India's defense minister with the defense ministers of ASEAN countries, and also perhaps a maritime exercise in 2023.
Mr. Tayal, as you mentioned the Indo-Pacific region, what do you think is a major cause of concern not only for India but also for all the member countries of ASEAN? Is it the issues related to the South China Sea?
There are 2-3 issues which are of major concern. One, of course, is the post-COVID recovery of the economy of the world. Yeah. And now it has been disrupted by the Ukraine war. So food security and energy security have also come on the table. And most of the countries of ASEAN as well as India are net importers of energy. So that will be one aspect. And the second is the strategic aspect, that gradually China is increasing its grip on South China Sea, belying all the promises given by President Xi Jinping to President Barack Obama. China has militarized features and islands and islets in South China Sea, and it is very blatantly violating the sovereign right of several ASEAN states like Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia. And even when there is a international law arbitration award against China, which has gone in favor of Philippines, China refuses to adhere and follow that award. Also, there is a attempt to have a code of conduct for in the South China Sea, that how every country will conduct itself, but China has been dilly-dallying for last 2 decades, and the ASEAN members who have maritime boundary in South China Sea facing this threat and this pressure from an expansionist China.
Ambassador Tayal, let's also talk about the cultural connect. If you see each of these countries, it is Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, the Hindu culture, and there are a number of similarities. Ramayana is enacted maybe in a different format and different form altogether. And for example, in Singapore, Tamil happens to be an official language. And in Vietnam, we have Cambodia, we have the pagodas and temples where the architecture is very similar, akin to, architecture of temples in Tamil Nadu, Garuda in Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So don't you think that cultural connect among ASEAN countries as well as India is really strong?
It is very strong from about 3rd, 4th century to 12th, 13th century. India's civilizational influence, religious influence, spiritual influence was predominant all over Southeast Asia. The group of 20 meeting will be in Bali. If one goes to Bali, it is an entirely Hindu culture and temples are there. Similarly, Angkor Wat in Cambodia and in Laos, Buddhist is the national religion. So this connection is very strong. And once I had participated in ASEAN cultural program, and 5 of the members had dances based on some part of Ramayana. So that shows how Ramayana as well as Mahabharata are very well known in these countries, and we need to build on these cultural connections.
But when we talk about, the social, cultural aspect, also economic aspect, the relation between India and ASEAN have predominantly been on these lines, socio-cultural and economic. But from here on, do you think it should move on to a strategic relationship also involving defense forces or say joint maritime exercises and all?
My own view is that ASEAN works on the basis of unanimity, and in ASEAN some countries like Cambodia and Laos are very close to China. Even Myanmar now is perhaps a little close to China. So this defense relationship, in my assessment, may not be possible with ASEAN as a group, as an entity, as a collective entity. But India has already been building very strong bilateral defense relationship with
each of the
important countries of ASEAN, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, like Malaysia, and that will be the way to go. Defense relationship more bilaterally, and economic relationship both bilaterally and with ASEAN.
We have a forthcoming meeting on the 20th of November of Defense Minister of ASEAN countries. So could that be a starting point for relationship in defense?
I believe it will be an informal meeting, and it can be a starting point, and that is our effort to enhance and expand the role of ASEAN. Because if ASEAN claims centrality in entire East Asia, then it cannot shy away from dealing with strategic issues, with very important political issues. And what the world is seeing, that assessment of many independent observers is that ASEAN is not able to have its act together and is playing a rather passive role, whether it is the Myanmar crisis. ASEAN has not been able to come with a firm policy how to deal with the military government in Tatmadaw in Myanmar, and similarly in South China Sea, ASEAN has not been able to take a collective position in spite of very open aggression and expansionist actions of China. So there is this thing is coming to now being questioned, and India's attempt is to strengthen ASEAN and decision-making process and to nudge it in a direction that it plays a role which it claims it has.
When the formal relationship with ASEAN started 30 years back in 1992, we used to call it the Look East policy, and from Look East we shifted to Act East policy, and in the year 2018, India invited 10 ASEAN member countries, the leaders of these 10 countries, as chief guests for the Republic Day celebrations. Don't you think that kind of very clearly shows to the world the kind of importance India gives to ASEAN?
That India, by its actions and our successive prime ministers, have given this message very clearly to ASEAN as a collective entity as well as to the 10 members of ASEAN, that India sees its own economic progress of our very important Northeast region, depending on having very close economic linkages with Southeast Asia in general and in ASEAN, and going right up to Republic of Korea and Japan. And in that, the correct connectivity issue becomes very important. The roads which are being constructed from Manipur, from our northeast through Myanmar up to Thailand, they need to be constructed fast, but because of the military coup in Myanmar, there has been a little hiccup and this connectivity is standing in the way. But India's commitment to have very deep economic, social, cultural, strategic ties with ASEAN as well as the individual members of ASEAN is very clear and is very well appreciated by the 10 members of ASEAN.
Ambassador Tayal, thank you so much for joining us on this program.
Thank you very much.